Welcome to the Inspired Hive podcast, where ideas ignite action and success stories fuel your next level up. I'm your host, Margot, and we're here to empower entrepreneurs, leaders, and professionals like you with the tools and inspiration to cultivate your dreams into reality. Perry Vogel is the founder and principal consultant of Vogel Consulting, LLC. He helps organizations modernize operations, optimize their business systems, and improve enterprise processes across industries. He has a deep experience in enterprise resource planning, implementation, in operational strategy, and IBM modernization, which make Perry the conduit between legacy systems and modern business innovation. He is passionate about helping companies create sustainable growth through technology, leadership, and practical transformation, and he has a giant heart of service. Let's hear what they have to say. Well, I am so pleased to welcome Perry Vogel to the podcast today. I met Perry through my son's Eagle Scout journey, and I have been inspired by his quest for adventure while balancing career and family life. Perry shines in planning, production, pivoting, and prevailing, and he bridges the gaps to go from here, where we are, to there in all of the things that he does. I know he will share some sweet nuggets on today's episode. Perry, welcome to the Inspired Hive podcast.
Well, thank you for having me. And with that introduction, thank you so much. I know we've had a wide variety of experiences together. And with your son's journey to Eagle, that was quite a great experience as well.
It was. And, it's interesting because sometimes when our kids are in things, there's a lot we learn as parents on the other side, not just in raising them, but a lot of that vicarious kind of training and information and activities that they're involved in that we kind of foster for them, but also take adventure along the way as well. And I know there's been many on the Eagle Scout journey. So, it's been so fun to follow, a lot of your career side. We haven't really talked a ton about this over the years, but, I've seen you've been in different places and international kind of adventures from a career standpoint. But I'd love to hear a little bit about how your story begins, whether it's leadership or career. Where does that start for you?
It really started as a farm boy. I grew up in a small town in southeast central North Dakota. I actually grew up out on the farm for the first 12 years, and then my older brother was getting married, and they were looking at starting a life out on the farm. And my parents decided to move into town, and I was the youngest of five. And there was a little bit of an age gap between the first three and the last two. My oldest brother was graduating that year that they moved into town, and he was going to go off to college, and I was going to be a single child at the age of 12, for lack of better terms.
Only.
Yeah. So, growing up on the farm, it was a lot of fun. And then starting to move into town was a new experience. The two things that really fascinated me were how the natural world works and computers, which are very, very different.
They are.
And so I really got hooked into programming when I moved into town. I worked on a project in assembler language, which is like the most basic language that there is. Wound up going to the International Science Fair when I was a senior in high school. I wasn't really an academic person, so I really wanted to go to as short a school as possible because I knew what I wanted to do. I wanted to be a programmer. So initially, I was going to go to a 18-month certificate program in Fargo, and last minute, I decided to switch my my college choice, and I went down to Wahpeton for a 2-year degree, and I got an associate degree in computer information systems, is what they called it back there then. And I got formally trained in RPG. It's what they call report program generator language. There were a couple of other languages, but that was the one that one was the one I thought was the coolest. And so started building my career then. And so I went on and started, looking for jobs after I was all ready to graduate. And there was a little ad in the paper that my mom had sent me for a place called Ecolab up in Grand Forks. And so I applied there, and little did I know is that Ecolab had a long-standing relationship with Wahpeton, and they actually really liked hiring Wahpeton students. So when I interviewed for them, it was about 10 minutes before my interview, my car broke down in the middle of an intersection.
Oh.
So I called the guy I was interviewing with, and I told him where he was, and he said, well, I can come pick you up. And so that's what he did. He went and picked me up, and I called the tow truck, and I said, the keys are in the visor. Tow it to the nearest shop, and I'll deal with this later. I have an interview in 10 minutes. I handled myself so well at that interview, they offered me the job on the spot. There was nothing I could do about my car breaking down. So, I worked for Ecolab for 6 years and learned a tremendous amount about programming and really enjoyed the connections that I made.
It's so fascinating to me just how, one thing that could have derailed this whole process, you really just said, hey, here's what's happening, and you could talk through that to continue on with what was meant to be that day. Such a big lesson, because so many of us, that car breaking down or the block in the road or the train or whatever it is just the reason we stop moving forward in whatever that plan was. And I can see why they hired you, because that wasn't your deterrent, right? That you
Right.
had a solution around that. And there's so many times that comes up in our careers and in our lives that I think a really key component for folks. I mean, we're dealing with a lot of stuff in 2026, and
Mhm.
for all of that to kind of be in the way, but still find ways around or find solution ideas to try and implement, it makes such a big difference.
Yeah, for sure. I think, one of the things that I kind of talk about, or I remind myself, is just keep showing up. You
Mm.
know, it's not always about, you know, being the one in the front of the room. I look at my scouting journey as an adult. As a young boy, I was in scouts up until about a month and a half after we moved into town, because at that point the troop folded. But up till that point, I had been in Cub Scouts my entire,
Wow.
youth. But I was a Bobcat um, through to the Arrow of Light. And one of the things that when I got re-involved in scouting as an adult, I just took a position on the committee as a secretary. And I said, this is the best position for me because I can learn from
Mm.
everybody else. All I need to do is listen and take good notes.
Hmm.
And that's what I did. And then a few months later, I got tapped on the shoulder to be an assistant scoutmaster, and then tapped on the shoulder to go into the Order of the Arrow, and then tapped on the shoulder to be a scoutmaster. And then a little later, I was a Vigil Honor member. So it was, it's just all I did was show up.
Hmm.
I didn't do anything special. I was just there. I was a consistent force. And I think that's what I also do in my work as well. It's like, sometimes it's not glamorous. It's not
Hmm.
fun. It's sometimes really difficult. You're dealing with people who don't really necessarily want change. But if you show them that you're willing to work with them and show up for them, that's how you gain that trust.
That's such a powerful message. We sometimes don't know what we need or what we're looking for, but being able to show up and be a part of a community, or like you said, just listen. Contributions of minutes is no small thing, but if that's a skill set, that it's something you're contributing to that community that is helpful and supportive, and sometimes that's all people need, right? Is to know they're not standing there by themselves. And you're right, people don't necessarily always want to change, but it's so much easier when they have somebody who is there alongside them to make that process happen.
Yes, that's for sure. Yeah.
And it's interesting because especially in the world of technology, there's just so much rapid change. And I think it's not always that folks don't want to change, they just don't understand what it could be on the other side, and that maybe it is easier, or there is another process, but because they don't understand, it's very difficult to kind of take those steps.
Well, the biggest fear in technology is really the fear of the unknown. Nobody knows where technology is going. The biggest fear is the obstacle itself. So,
Yeah.
you know, we don't know where technology is going. We hear a lot about AI right now, and it's sort of funny. It's a little reminiscent of a time when IBM had kind of rebranded everything to WebSphere. Everything was WebSphere, and I was like, well, what is WebSphere? Well, I think that's the feeling that I get right now with AI. I mean, because everything seems to be AI. So it has AI been around since the 1960s when computers were invented and really became mainstream? Absolutely. I mean, all of it is artificial. All of it is intelligence. Um, so we really have to kind of you know look at that and then say, well, what are we really afraid of? I don't know. It's that really that unknown piece is what
Yeah.
we're really afraid of. What does that mean? What does that mean for me? What does that mean for my future? How am I going to have to adjust?
Hmm.
And that's why I keep saying, just keep showing up. Just keep
Yeah.
showing up, because if you're not showing up, you're not going to be part of it.
And that's taking an action step, right? It may be not a fully engaged step, but you're there, you're hearing, you're seeing, and it really is an opportunity for that learning to happen. One of the biggest things that we see in behavioral health care is very similar to what we see in business, is very similar to what you're saying. People fear uncertainty, and we need tools to navigate. How do we deal with the uncertainty? How do we deal with things that we don't know? And unless we're there to test it, to try it, to figure it out as we go, it really kind of either leaves us stuck or it propels us forward, depending which process we use with that. What inspires you, Perry? You've had this journey from the farm to around the globe traveling. What inspires you?
I guess my inspiration, I think, would be transformation, in systems, in young people, landscapes, um, in the quiet moments when something that's broken becomes working. I think about what that means in kind of every direction of my life. So in my consulting work, it's that moment where organizations, they're tangled in technology, and that was something that was supposed to help them, and
Hmm.
it's something that's actually become an obstacle for them, and that shift from being stuck to operational, that's transformational.
Oh,
So earlier, you said, many industries, whether it's manufacturing, distribution, food and beverage, healthcare, all of these industries, retail, they all have technology, and in some form, some of that technology has become an obstacle. Whether that's, it's an old technology that the new young people aren't familiar with. You'd think that the young people would know the technology, but they learn the technology that's available currently. So that becomes inspiring to me when I see that happening, and also, when you talk about modernizing technology, how can we bridge that gap between something that's working in the background, something that has functioned for 30, 40, 50 years, even before I started my career, and bring that into a new age of, where young people who are not necessarily needing to learn that back end, but want to be able to enhance that back end by feeding it with the information that needs to be fed into it.
Yeah. I do hope we've trained some of them on that back end, though, because those spaceships way out there are still needing people to
Yeah,
know about them.
yeah, yeah. And you know what? One of my things I keep on asking my own son, hey, do you want to learn this technology? Because nobody's teaching it anymore. And in 10 years, I am the youngest of the people who know this technology. I'm the youngest of them. So in 10 years, I'll be retiring. They will want to keep that back end running because it's functioned for 30, 40, 50 years. And there are certain things in technology that don't change, right? There's, accounting back ends. I mean, how much does accounting change? You still have to have your debits equal your credits. And if you're off by a penny, you still got to find them, So there's those four things that need to stay, but then there's these new layers that we're adding on that make people more productive, make systems better, different ways of looking at that accounting information and really understanding how your businesses are doing. So there's those layers that you can add on to a base system that's still very, very functional. And that's what modernization is.
I love that. It's like sometimes we talk about kind of figuring out how things work by peeling away the onion. But in this example, you're talking about adding the layers once we know that core. And
right.
We have to do both for kind of movement in adoption and transformation. And I love that analogy that you just shared. So thank you. I give everyone an opportunity to kind of brag on themselves or share with us what you have going on from either business or leadership standpoint. And I'd love to hear what's on your horizon or launching soon.
I did launch a consulting business. I am doing technical consulting on the IBM I with ERP systems, or anybody who is interested in really transforming their systems, bringing things from an older era and wanting to modernize some things. I'm available to do that. So Vogel Consulting is it's 30 plus years of dedicated hands-on experience within industries of manufacturing, food distribution, retail, healthcare, and really working on modernizing those systems. One of the things that I asked my son about a year ago is what's the new thing that young programmers are using? Oh yeah, everyone's using Microsoft Visual Studio Code. And I said, okay, I'll start learning that. So about a year ago, I started learning a new, what they call an integrated development environment. And I thought, I don't know how this is really going to apply to what I'm working on, because I'm working on the back end. Very rarely am I working on the front end, but hey, I'll learn this new technology. And just as late as October of 25, so this was about a year ago, that was in February, October of 25, IBM announced that they were putting out what they called IBM Bob. And what's really fascinating about both of these things at IBM is that they are built on or within Visual Studio Code, which was something that I started learning a little over a year ago. So some of the things that you don't even realize are going to be part of your arsenal of tools, because it doesn't really make sense to have it as part of your tool set at the moment. Sometimes it becomes part of your tool set. And so
I love that so much.
And that's kind of what happened. I mean, like I said, I asked my son on a whim, what are the young people using? And I was like, let's do it. And I wound up, maybe one of the first times in my career, to have had the foresight to have something in my tool set. And so that's one of the things that I'm really going to be focusing in on, is how can I bring people up into the IBM I world, because IBM I has been going away since 1993 when I started in my career, which is kind of a funny thing, because it hasn't ever gone away, and it's evolved continuously.
And how interesting that it's, this idea of I'm going to learn something new without necessarily understanding any of the connectedness. And I see that so many times, not only in business, but also in leadership, where we don't always understand how the path is weaving itself together. That's a hindsight, not a foresight. And it really circles back to what you said earlier, which is you just have to show up. How amazing that you asked your son, because we learned so much from him, right? What's the new thing? To be available and be learning that and be open to that. Is there, in your business journey or leadership journey, is there something that has been maybe a big lesson or something that someone shared with you that, or you learned the hard way, that you'd like to share with others?
Yeah, so I think I have somebody who inspired me, in a way that I didn't really ever recognize. And I think, a lot of people come in and out of your life over the years. And you don't necessarily know why they came in or what they taught you. Back in 1999, it was the time when I was leaving Ecolab. I had moved over to a company called Acme Tools. And one of the things that my supervisor did is he sat us down in the room. There were 4 of us in the IT department, and he kind of matched 2 of us up, and he said, you're going to work with Ron Ford. And so Ron Ford and I had this relationship where he could take a business idea and he could show me a business idea, and I could take a concept from the computer system, and we would meet in the middle somewhere. So we could take what business need there was and really understand it from how we can translate that into computers. He and I were on this team together, and my primary objective was to split the database, because Acme Tools had sold off their catalog division to Amazon.com. And that was the very early stages of Amazon.com kind of getting into other things than just books. And at the time, they launched a tools and hardware division. But me knowing only the computer end of it, and Ron knowing the business end of it, we really got along together and we really understood the entire process together. And he was really the first person that I really connected with and really inspired me to really start thinking about who I can work with in a business to really get the results from the business buy-in on the computer end of it. Because part of that is bridging that discrepancy. And so I think one of the things that really helped me as a person was that relationship that we could have together and really understanding the trust that we could build.
How powerful that is. Oftentimes folks will think the group project or working together with a partner is more of a challenge than it is the solution to bridging that gap, and to have that lesson be what you've taken from that time and moved through all of the things that you've done is just so powerful. Thank you so much for sharing that.
Wow.
I just want to thank you again for your willingness and openness to chat with us. There's so many aspects to the things that you do, and I knew there would be so many great nuggets of conversation from that. I close each episode with a quote. I select it ahead. Don't really have a clue where our conversation goes. But the quote that I picked today was from Elsie Lincoln Benedict, and it says, "If you keep thinking of the gap instead of the bridge, you'll never bridge the gap." And how appropriate that is for what you just shared in terms of thinking of that relationship as kind of the hooks to bring that bridge together from business to computing. And such a great conversation. Thank you so much, Perry, for being here. So grateful you listened to this episode of the Inspired Hive podcast. Be sure to follow me on social media at Inspired Hive Podcast, and don't forget to subscribe to the podcast. I can't wait to see you back here for our next episode, and as always, remember to live inspired.